Hi there, and welcome to Ancestral Recall. I'm your host, Eli Kaplan. This is a Magic YouTube show that goes through the sets of yesteryear, explaining the mechanics, dynamics, and best cards and strategies. Last show, we examined the lore and mechanics of champs, and today we're continuing our examination of Champions of Kamigawa by looking at the set's cycles. Champions of Kamigawa is a set I have very fond memories of, and I'm excited to talk about it. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start with the cycles. At common, we have the Deceivers. Cunning spirits, the Deceivers run the gamut of casting costs, but all share the ability to look at the top card of the library and pay 2 to reveal it. And if that card's a land, then the creature gets a bonus of some sort. The blue one gets flying, the black one gets death touch, the white one untaps, the red one gets first strike, and the green one gets huge. This cycle was lots of fun, providing players with the option to bluff, and sometimes the right play was to just not use the mana and activate the second ability without looking, or pay 1, take a look, and just bluff. Would your opponent call? Make no mistake, these cards were incredibly entertaining, and they absolutely deserve a chance in cubes. In fact, Kamigawa draft cubes are a casual format I heartily endorse. Another cool common cycle were the Zubaras, 1/2 spirits for 1C that gave a bonus when they died. They were reasonable fodder for soul shift decks, and if you were able to get multiples out, their bonus multiplied for each dying Zubara. At uncommon, we got the Honden, legendary shrines aligned with the 5 colors and the Myojin. For each Honden you controlled, a beneficial upkeep effect increased. I played a 5-colored sealed deck running 4 Hondens at the Day 2 sealed PTQ at GP Matsuyama in 2005, which got me into the top 8 and got me a blue envelope. Draw 4, do 4 damage, game 4, make 4 1/1 tokens. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. If you're interested in reading the tournament report I wrote about it at the time, check out the link below in the description. The Honden would have been incredibly abusive and constructed if not for their legendary status. The one that got played the most was Honden of Infinite Rage due to its low mana cost. A few blue decks also ran the Honden of Seeing Winds without any partner shrines, since a personal Howling Mine for 5 mana is probably worth it. At rare, we got a cycle of legendary lands that tapped for colored mana or gave legends a bonus. These lands have become staples for EDH since there's almost always a general for them to pump. The one that's most powerful is Shizo, Death's Storehouse, giving legends evasion. Ooh, that's awesome. Okay guys, settle in. I've got a lot to say about Kamigawa's dragons. There are only 5 dragons in the whole of Kamigawa block. Why only 5? Well, for one thing, while Magic players love dragons, Japanese lore has surprisingly few. Chinese stories and folktales, not Japanese, are the ones that have many dragons. And the Japanese dragon stories come by way of China. Now, Chinese dragons are dramatically different from the European variety. While they can fly, it's due to their unearthly spiritual nature rather than using wind currents. Chinese dragons don't even have wings. They bear a distinctive mustache. And they're usually not known for eating maidens, but rather being bringers of prosperity or destruction. When I was growing up as a kid, one of my absolute favorite books was J. Williams' 1976 book, Everyone Knows What a Dragon Looks Like, illustrated by Mercer Mayer, and this was a story set in mythical ancient China about a child who befriends a fat, mischievous old man while trying to find out what a dragon looks like. He had no idea. The rest of his friends and elders mock the child for not knowing what a dragon looks like, but each of their descriptions of the ferocious beast is different from the next. Now, that fat, elderly old man, well, it turns out he's the dragon protector of the city, and he saves it from an invading horde. I read this book so many times, so when I think of dragons, the first one that come to mind are the Chinese variety, not the Western type. I'm glad the Wizards decided to broaden the scope of the mythology and include these in Kamigawa. As for the actual dragons themselves, they appear as a 5-color cycle of dragons. The first portal set had dragons appear in all the colors except for green. Green rarely gets big flyers, and dragons are the classic Magic archetype of big flyers. Mirage had a cycle of dragons in all 5 colors, but the green dragon required mana to fly, so it doesn't count in my book. Champions of Kamigawa was the first set to have a true dragon cycle in all 5 colors. They were divine spirits as well as dragons, and when vanquished, their power lingered on the battlefield. Jugen, the rising star, was considered the weakest of the lot. When Jugen died, it bequeathed 5+1/+1 counters if you chose to any number of creatures. Jugen also demanded a steep dedication to green mana. It had the same converted mana cost as the others, but required great commitment to stir to fight. Kokusho, the Evening Star, was a terror of tables in multiplayer, and still saw a reasonable amount of play in Standard. Draining all players for a quarter of their life when dying is a seriously splashy effect. Kokusho was the most expensive card in the set for the first few months of Champion's release. Yosei, the Morning Star, also saw play in several control decks. His death trigger locked down an opponent's untap step, and also went to town tapping their stuff. This is as close to a time warp as white gets. In Kamigawa block constructed, numerous players use ramp decks to get multiple copies of Yosei into play, getting multiple triggers, and that's brutal. Keiga, the Tide Star, is probably the most popular of the cycle. Stealing an opponent's best creature is a great way to make up for losing a 5/5 flyer. This is a stellar EDH card, obviously. I don't understand how a star can be connected to the tides, because the moon is that much more important, but hey, I'll forgive a bit of discontinuity when the creature is this sweet. And finally, there's the red dragon, Ryusei, the Falling Star. When this guy buys the farm, he rolls around in his dying throes, and destroys the farm he just bought. And the next farm over. And the whole village. This was the pre-release foil for the set. Oh, and there's one other dragon I have to mention, Tatsumasa, the Dragon's Fang. This mighty blade can inflict great damage when wielded, but if its controller channels enough energy into it, the blade awakens into the actual dragon whose spirit was contained within. It was overpriced, to be sure, but the flavor on this card was amazing. While the dragons were powerful representatives of their colors, they were not the highest form of spirit. That authority belonged to the Myojin, spirits that embodied the soul of the 5 colors of magic themselves. Just as all sentients paid homage to the kami before the outbreak of the war, all kami paid tribute to their respective myojin. The myojin of Infinite Rage bears much likeness to the Asura, the many-armed warrior kings of Indian myth. His fury devastates the whole of the land. The myojin of Night's Reach knows all secrets whispered fearfully, and will force all who oppose it to yield their treasures. The myojin of Seeing Winds is as close to omniscient as mere mortals can imagine, and offers its ally virtually unparalleled knowledge and wisdom. Such thoughts can hardly be contained. The myojin of Cleansing Fire defends purity, and will destroy all that it finds fault with. And none have been judged worthy to date. Myojin of Life's Web bears the greatest strength, and is tied to the smallest and the greatest of the plane's creatures. All heed its call. Okay, now that I've indulged my inner Vorthos, we've got to look at these cards mechanically. Myojin are spirits, so they trigger Spiritcraft, but they're so expensive that never really came into play. In order to truly harness the full power of the Myojin and get their divinity counter, you need to play them for the actual mana cost. Putting them into play with Ether Vial, Elvish Piper, or Quicksilver Amulet will not fulfill that requirement. When they've got a divinity counter on them, the myojin are also indestructible. You can set up all sorts of shenanigans with the myojin and propagate effects from Scar's block, and in Betrayers of Kamigawa, you can give any permanent a divinity counter and indestructibility with that which was taken. Well, as long as that which was taken is in play. If the myojin were to see print today, there's a very good chance that we'd also see God added to their creature type. They've got every claim to divinity that the chiefs of the Theros pantheon do. Now, let's just get into the cards. Ushi Tenderfoot is a great way to highlight the flip mechanic. The Tenderfoot starts life as a 1/1 for W, an eager cadet, but if he can manage to vanquish an opponent, then he makes a name for himself as Kenzo, the hard-hearted. Kenzo is an utter and complete badass, weighing in at a whopping 3/4 with Double Strike and Bushido too. This guy can go toe-to-toe with a Leviathan, or trade favorably with a Crawworm, and it starts with just a 1-drop. All it takes is mentoring him through a fight. I never heard of anyone getting him to work though, and that's sad. Just a note, Bushi means soldier, but Bushi are far more common and low in rank than samurai. Cage of Hands is a pacifism variant of Tempest's Shackles, but the concept is, well, crazy. Instead of manifesting as a solid set of walls, ghostly hands push someone back into place. White removal doesn't have to be friendly to work. 8½ Tails refers to the legendary Nine Tails, an honored fox of Japanese legends. Yes, this predates the Pokemon. By a lot. Fractional Tails offers quick, easy protection from any number of sources to any of your permanents, and he can even give protection to a Planeswalker. Usually, bestowing protection is reserved for creatures, but this guy goes a step further. This fox is a beloved EDH general. I don't like propaganda effects, but at least I'm glad they pushed this effect out of blue and into white. Windborn Muse was the precedent for Ghostly Prison, and while we haven't seen this type of effect reprinted in Standard for a while without a whole lot of additional text on it, thankfully, Ghostly Prison is a very popular effect in multiplayer. This is one of the most powerful enchantments in my cube. Isamaru, Hound of Kunda, was a thought experiment by Mark Rosewater, who was involved in the set's development. 1994's Legends had a large number of legendary vanilla creatures, and most of them went over poorly due to weak stats. So, in a set with a legendary theme, could there be a legendary vanilla creature? The answer was yes. For a single white mana, you get a 2/2 with only one drawback, the legendary part. White weenie pilots were torn between the elegant efficiency of Isamaru and his staggering drawback. An opening hand with 1 Isamaru is excellent, with 2 Isamaru is subpar, and 3 Isamaru is atrocious. While this dog's been left in the shadows by more recent 1-drops, we do want to let this dog have its day. If you're drafting Champ's block, the best white common in the set is Kabuto Moth. A Kabuto is a samurai's war headdress, so these are the spirits of the warrior's helmets turned against them. Getting through an army's defense when these guys are across the table from you is absolute murder. I found it really hard to pass these guys in draft, and they were magnets for removal. The worst part is, these are spirits, so even when you're able to kill them, Soul Shift often brought them right back into the fray. Urgh! It's rare to think of a Grey Ogre as a first pick, but Kitsune Blademaster got picked early a whole lot. First strike and 3 power in the middle of combat was a very good deal at the time. Kitsune Blademaster was probably the most aggressive white common 3-drop creature printed up to that point in time. And Blademaster interacted very successfully with a certain tribe that showed up later in the next sets. More about that in a bit. Take a look at Kami of the Painted Fields. The art's amazing. The stats, well, 6 mana for a 3-power flyer, it ain't great. One thing to note about Soul Shift is that in all but one case, its number is 1 less than the converted mana cost of the dying spirit. If it was the cost of the creature, well then the spirit could just return to your hand scot-free. Last episode, I mentioned Kunda, Lord of Eiganjo, and how he mixed so many of the set's keywords. Kunda is a source of the war between mortals and kami, but I'll explain why with Betrayers. Unlike the Myojin, his divinity is constant, and that's what's so messed up about him. He's a human that has taken on the aspect of the divine, and yet is still a mere mortal. A mortal who can take down a crawworm with ease, but still a mortal. Ironically, I find Masako, the Humorless, to be quite the amusing card. This doesn't untap your creatures to let them block, and yet your creatures can still block. She's understated as far as legends go, but the text here is unique. If you're playing white and want to shut down someone using recursion tricks, Samurai of the Pale Curtain is a reasonable choice. It exiles all permanents that would otherwise go to the graveyard, and has a respectable, if not stellar, fighting ability for a 2-drop. If you're interested in building a deck based on learning martial arts and the process of honing one's skill, Sensei Goldentail should be an auto-include. Sensei Goldentail will induct a creature into the fold of Samurai, though unlike virtually all other cards that alter type, the creature retains all of its previous creature types. The Disciple also gains Bushido 1. It's important to note that a creature can have multiple instances of Bushido 1, so repeated activations on the same creature are not redundant. I don't know if Sean McKeown watches the show, but I like his work a lot, and Azami, Lady of Scrolls, is an amazing draw engine and his favorite EDH card, and this set is chock full of draw engines. Try 3. Honden of Seeing Winds, and one other guy I'll get into in a minute. But Azami has the advantage of not having to deal with summoning sickness, as well as 0 mana cost, and she turns all your other wizards into draw engines. That is unadulterated awesomeness. Dampened Thoughts is a crucial card in this set. It doesn't look like much, but this uncommon was the heart of the first ever dedicated draft strategy that didn't deal with damage. Dampened Thought was all about drafting this blue arcane spell and tacking it onto as many arcane effects as possible. The very best spell to tack onto with this spell was Candle's Glow, which allowed you to gain life instead of just preventing damage. A few cunning drafters broke this strategy open on Magic Online, but the trick was, once everyone knew about it, it was harder to draft. But other people figured that they couldn't get it, so they didn't go for it. So sometimes the window was open. Gifts Ungiven is one of the most brutal instants ever printed. For 4 mana, you're going to get 2 of your deck's best cards, though which ones you will get specifically are up to your opponent. This is a huge tool for decks that use the graveyard, and so Gifts sees significant play in Legacy, and occasionally Modern and Vintage. This may be Champ's most powerful card. Hinder. This counterspell was incredibly crucial in EDH, allowing its player until very recently to tuck a general at the bottom of a library. The reason for its inclusion in Champions of Kamigawa was to give blue an effective solution to dealing with pesky spirits that could otherwise be soul-shifted. Joushi Apprentice. This guy saw play in lots of control decks. Essentially, it's a Jam Day Tomb for blue that costs 1 less to play and 1 less to use, but it dies to removal. Its efficiency has been outmoded in almost all casual formats, but the fun of flipping the Apprentice into Tomoya, the Revealer, who could theoretically deck an opponent out easily and limited, was attractive. Meloku, the Clouded Mirror, or the Crowded Mirror, it's easy to hypercorrect. This was essentially a blue fireball, letting players turn land drops into 1/1 flyers. Players could slowly produce them over time, or just go for the throat. The naming convention of Kamigawa is intentionally subverted with Meloku because she has an L in her name. No other proper name in Kamigawa contains an L, because Japanese has no L sound. No L sound. So Meloku's so mysterious, her name can't even be conceived properly by the denizens of this plane. There's a lot of Soratami in this set, so I'm only going to hit on the highlights. Soratami Savant is my personal pick because she can essentially be Mana Leak on a stick. The cost of bouncing a land is not small, but Mana Leak is a game-winning effect. While this effect isn't as game-breaking as the other uncommon, Soratami Mirror Mage required players to pick up 3 lands, not 1, so its ability had to be used very judiciously. The Savant was much easier to use, despite the requirement of leaving 3 mana up. And the nice thing about the Savant is, sometimes the other players slowed down and waited until they hit 3 more lands to play their spell safely, and that's when you hit them with the actual counter magic in your hand, like Hinder. Time Stop. This card is wonky in rules text because it lets you effectively counter uncounterable spells. Is Emrakul on the stack? Emrakul can't be countered, right? But if you play Time Stop, the spell gets removed from the stack and is exiled. Everything on the stack gets exiled, since going to the graveyard is part of resolution, and ending the turn stops anything from resolving. This spell also shuts down any storm combo. Sadly, Time Stop can be answered with Counterspell, unlike Last Word, but it is the one out that blue has to any number of problem uncounterable spells. The Unspeakable is a throwback to Mirage's Spirit of the Night. The Spirit of the Night could be summoned with a confluence of 3 malign, humble beasts converging together. Similarly, the Unspeakable can be searched for and played at any time when a candy blue player waits to cast Peer Through the Depths, Reach Through Mists, and Sift Through Sands, 3 card draw spells. Why rely on creatures to call on an ineffable beast when blue can just use a combination of hidden secrets? To my knowledge, no one ever got this trick to work correctly, but maybe I'm wrong, so if you've done it or seen others do it, please let me know in the comments. Uyo, Silent Prophet, is another legendary Soratami, and while her ability requires bouncing 2 lands, not 1, copying a spell is a big deal. She sees some EDH play. Wandering Ones. It's a simple 1/1 spirit for 1 mana, reasonable Soul Shift fodder, but back in the day, Shuhei Nakamura took a challenge from his readers to play this in a deck and win a tournament. And he did it! Thanks to being able to sneak a single copy into his 246-card Battle of Wits deck he piloted at Japanese Nationals in 2005. It may be janky, the spirits may be cute, but they did get played in a high-profile constructed deck. Befoul. This staple effect first saw print in Urza's Saga and got reprinted in 7th edition before its last printing here. Wizards eventually soured on black land destruction, so I don't anticipate this modal spell showing up anytime soon. Cranial Extraction. Many years ago, a friend of mine who was getting into Magic asked me if it was fair to play this card against his friend's combo deck. I said, well, it's not, but then again, you are playing black, right? Why should you care? Cranial Extraction is a very transgressive card, and yes, it has Arcane, so you could splice things onto it. The only real predecessor to this is Ice Age's Jester's Cap, which lets you pitch 3 cards of choice from your opponent's library, but it couldn't touch their hand. Scar's Memoricide is the updated version with a worse name, but they can't just reprint arcane cards willy-nilly. Gut-Wrencher Oni is typical of Black's signature race, requiring a discard on each of your turns if it isn't getting the proper worship. 5/4 with Trample for 5 may not seem all that good today, but at the time, these stats were pretty darn pushed. Hideous Laughter. This brutal mass removal spell had the additional potential for repetition thanks to Splice. This was no joke, and even saw some constructive play. Hideous Laughter is also noteworthy for being an instance when most infest effects are sorceries. Kiku, Death's Flower, is a wicked assassin that tries to take down Toshi Umezawa, but she just can't get the job done. She is not a ninja, she doesn't need stealth, because she can just redirect any lethal force aimed at her back to the source. In the novel, she used incredibly lethal poison from flowers. Kudo Pit Lord. This is Kamigawa's answer to Lord of the Pit. His name can be read as a Lord of Crows associated with death, but his English name, Kudo, can also be read as Black. Like the original Pit Lord, he has a steep upkeep cost. Unlike the original Pit Lord, he lets you trade life for spreading plague upon one's enemies, and there was no other spirit that could let you return him to his hand. He was that mighty and unmanageable. Nezumi Grave Robber. This is a casual all-star, exiling cards from yards until he finally empties one out. When that happens, look out, because now you've got to deal with Night Eyes, the Desecrator. Yes, that name is metal. Night Eyes requires more juice to function, but can flat out bring any dead creature back to fight on your side. This is incredibly powerful at casual tables, and hitting for 4 isn't too shabby either. Like the Grave Robber, Nezumi Shortfang starts off small, but he's still powerful. Just as Joushi Apprentice is a discounted Jam Day Tomb, Shortfang is a discounted Disrupting Scepter. Wait, you can use your Shortfang on your opponent's turn. That's better than Disrupting Scepter. And once he forces your opponent to discard their last card, Shortfang becomes Stab Whisker the Odious, a 3/3 with the ability of the Rack. This was too fragile in constructed formats except as a sideboard card against control, but in limited, this guy was a total bomb. Knight of Soul's Betrayal is the first enchantment that makes all creatures smaller. Thankfully, it's also legendary, so it's hard to abuse. Rend Flesh and Rend Spirit are a matched pair representing the conflict of Kamigawa. While the number of creatures both destroy are roughly evenly matched in the set, Rend Flesh is the more powerful spell in Limited as it serves as an affordable splice vehicle on top of its strong effect. Rend Flesh also sees a decent amount of play in EDH due to the huge diversity of creature types. I really like the gag of Brothers Yamazaki subtly subverting the legend rule. I also think fondly of my own brother when I play this. Devouring Rage got me the win in my last round of Rochester draft at GP Osaka. It was a very late 15th card splash pick in the last pack of Rochester draft in my blue-green deck. So yeah, this card won a good amount of money for me. This is a very red thing to do. Godo, Bandit Warlord, is one of the more fun EDH generals, tutoring up and dumping an equipment into play. The other thing is, he lets you attack twice, or stay vigilant. And if he dies, oh well, that just means that the next time he hits the table, you get to bring out another piece of equipment. That's some good stuff. Hanabi Blast isn't the most powerful spell, but it does have an interesting ability, returning to your hand and forcing a random discard on resolution. This makes it unique among red burn spells. See my 6th episode for a less than fun story about this card though. Now, when you want to talk about a broken creature, you want to talk about Kiki-Jiki Mirror Breaker. This legend will let you copy any non-legendary creature in play at will, with the token going away at the end of turn. Combine this with a creature with an untap trigger or a flicker trigger, and you can get infinite guys. Even when you can't go infinite with this guy, he's still brutal. You can even get mileage out of Kiki-Jiki with your opponent's creatures. The obvious response to this card is Rise of the Eldrazi's Splinter Twin, which has created a very powerful Modern and Legacy archetype. Kumano, Master Yamabushi, is the legendary mountain monk who found a method of destroying the essence of spirits entirely, and this is reflected in his exiling ability. The nice thing in terms of flavor is that his exiling is so transgressive that even those ravaged by the kami can't bring themselves to accept his methods. While Stone Rain served its purpose in many limited and constructive formats, Champions of Kamigawa is the last ride for the venerable Stone Rain. The art's generic, but I really do prefer it over the others. Zozu, the Punisher, is a good, fixed version of Ankh of Mishra. I strongly dislike the idea of players being forced to take damage for such a fundamental action of the game, but at least Zozu is legendary, so multiples can't happen. And it's 1 mana more than Ankh, and can get removed easily. So this could have been a lot worse. Phew! That's a lot of ground I covered. I'll cut this here, and we'll come back to finish Kamigawa next week. Next time we'll look at the green cards, the artifacts, and the lands. We'll look at the biggest financial hits, and give the final verdict on Champions of Kamigawa. And in future shows, we'll get to Betrayers and Saviors, and discuss why the block as a whole got tarred with such a bad brush. Thanks for watching. If you want to add something or join the discussion, leave a comment please. I really do appreciate it. And if you want, check out my older videos, and subscribe if you haven't already. This is Eli Kaplan for Ancestral Recall, signing off. Good games, and good luck.